Now, before we get into actually providing some reasons for faith, I want to look at some key concepts. And the first one is just the idea of faith. And then I want to ask you a question or two before we get going. When you think of faith, what's the connotation that you associate with that term? You say, well, I have faith that so-and-such is going to happen. What's the kind of connotation that, yeah?
I would say it's like, it's not a leap of blindness, but that it is rather a step into what you know to be. So it's an action behind what you already know.
Okay, that's a meaning of faith that I'm kind of sympathetic with. But is there a more common meaning that's kind of the opposite of that? Do you ever run into the idea that faith is like what you believe in, but you're not really sure is going to happen? Or, I don't know that the Dodgers are going to win tomorrow, but I have faith,
It's like hope.
Yeah, it's kind of a hope, maybe not even a well-grounded hope, but okay? So sometimes faith is something you believe that's kind of uncertain, all right? Now you're saying it can also be the opposite. It might be something you believe in, a system of belief for which you have some really good reasons, all right? And that's the other meaning. That's kind of where I'm going. You gave me the answer I wanted before I wanted it. See, I want to draw out all the wrong answers first and then get to the right answer. It's not really a question of the answers, actually. It's that there are different connotations of the term, right? So one connotation is kind of something you believe that's uncertain, okay? But you believe it anyway because you have faith. It's something you muster up, a kind of internal confidence. Typically, we associate that meaning of faith with religion. But it turns out that even scientists have faith. All right? One of the things that scientists have faith in is that the inferences that they make from evidence are actually true. They can't be sometimes absolutely certain, but they try to make the best inference they can to try to explain and make sense of the data. But they don't get absolute certainty. Oftentimes also in science, well, always in science, you have to assume some things about the world. They're sometimes called presuppositions. So you can have faith in the sense of believing in some presuppositions. One thing scientists presuppose about the world is that every event has a cause. We can't actually prove that because you haven't seen every event. We also assume that nature will be uniform and orderly and that the same basic laws of physics that apply today are going to apply tomorrow. We have a kind of faith in that, but we can't prove that because we're not there yet to tomorrow. So there's a kind of uncertainty even in those disciplines which we charge to give us knowledge, okay, like science. The third, no one said this idea, but if you're thinking in religious terms, faith is sometimes what we talk about as far as our trust or belief in God's presence. Sometimes it's a kind of subjective thing. Well, I have faith that God is with me. I have faith in God's presence or power. Okay? That's another meaning of faith. There's nothing wrong with any of these. They're just different connotations of the same term. But I just want us to be clear on the kind of faith that we're going to be providing reasons for. My personal hope, because I think I have a faith in this faith number 3, a subjective sense of God's presence in my life. I hope that you all have that or find that if you're seeking it. But that's something that very often also needs some intellectual support. Now we're kind of getting to the definition that you had in mind. Faith is also a kind of belief in a system of thought or a personal philosophy. Or another way to talk about it is the idea of a worldview. How many of you are, by the way, familiar with that term, worldview? Okay. Most of you? Okay. What's a definition of a worldview? When you talk about a worldview, what is a worldview? Yeah.
It's kind of like like the lens that you see through the world as what is true and what's not.
Excellent. I like your definition a lot. And here's a couple other things I usually associate with it. It's a personal philosophy. It's a hypothesis, maybe you could say, about ultimate reality. It's a set of answers to some really basic questions like, what's the prime reality? What's the thing from which everything else comes? God? Is it matter? Is it the laws of nature? Is it something else? What's the nature of human nature? What are we like? Are we basically good? Are we basically selfish? Are we totally determined by our genes and our environment, or do we have free will? These kinds of questions. A worldview question is kind of more philosophical question about some really basic things, about the nature of ultimate reality, the nature of human nature, the nature of the world around us in general terms, okay? Let's look at some basic worldviews, because I think this is really critical. The most important question that worldview answers is, what is the prime reality? What's the thing from which everything else comes? If we think about that question, what are some possible answers to that basic question? What is the thing from which everything else comes?
God.
What's the thing that's always been here? One answer is God. Okay, that's an obvious answer. Christians, Jews, people of Islamic faith, they think it's God. And typically religious theists think of God as a person, a mind, a spirit, someone that is conscious, to whom you can pray, and so forth, okay? What's another thing from which everything else could come? What's another candidate to be the prime reality?
Big Bang.
The Big Bang, well, the Big Bang is a theory about the origin of the universe. We're going to talk about that tomorrow.
Okay.
But I think what you're getting at is that there are some people who think that the matter that was way back there is the thing from which everything else comes.
Yes.
Am I reading your mail? Okay, so I don't think people say that anymore, actually. That's a very...
It's okay.
See,
It's okay.
I'm only hip from like the 1970s, so don't think I'm really cool. It's all put on. Okay, so all right, that's good. Yeah, matter. Okay, or if you're a physics guy, you know that matter and energy are interchangeable. So sometimes materialists, that's a worldview, will say matter and energy are the thing from which everything else came, or else they'll say matter and energy and the laws of nature that act upon them is the thing from which everything else came. So I got a cool diagram there, but one I drew over here that displays my artistic ability, such as it is. Okay, and what I do, these are my famous worldview diagrams. They're not actually famous. But the circle represents physical reality. Inside represents a pendulum, okay? And the pendulum, rather, is representing the laws of nature. And then you've got all the physical stuff. That's a planet, that's a sun, that's a star, in case you didn't know. This is an animule here, and mountains and trees and stuff. Okay, so according to the materialists, the thing from which everything else came is matter. That matter combined evolved and eventually more complex life arose, and that finally produced us. Now, according to theists, it's a very different answer. Theists think that the thing from which everything else came is a personal God, an eternal self-existent being, omnipotent perhaps, omnipresent perhaps, but the idea is that God is a person and a mind who is conscious, who has intentions, and that God brought the universe into existence. Classical theists think that God created the world, created the universe, that God upholds the world, and that God also sometimes enters the universe and acts as an agent in the universe that he otherwise sustains and upholds. Acting as an agent is another word for like a miraculous event, like parting the Red Sea. Okay, so that's another idea, another a key worldview that we're going to encounter. And deism is a kind of modified version of theism where God only creates the world and then does nothing beyond that. But there's one other really big system of thought that you find is more Eastern. It's the idea of pantheism. And that idea is that there is a God, but that God is not personal. God is more like the Force in Star Wars, kind of an impersonal oneness that binds everything together, but is not in any way conscious or aware or intelligent or rational, anything like that. It's a mystical oneness. So in the pantheistic worldview, let's see, I got to get another picture of this on the blackboard too. Okay, and so here's the idea here of God is this one, okay? In the East, they say Atman is Brahman, the soul of the world is the soul of the one, the soul of God. So God is connected to, all the parts of the physical world are part of God. So there's God in this desk, God in this table, God in you, God in me, God in the computer, God in the trees, the flowers, and that's the pantheistic idea. So there's 3 or 4 different worldviews, big worldviews that we'll be talking about. Materialism, matter's the prime reality. Theism, personal God is the prime reality. Deism, a personal but remote God is the prime reality. And pantheism, an impersonal God is the prime reality. So which of those ideas about ultimate reality is the right idea? Which is the one that is the thing from which everything else came? Well, that's one of the big questions that we're going to be looking at. In fact, the first one. And you can think of that question in 2 ways. You can say, what is the prime reality? A little more open-ended. We're going to consider all of them. Or you can also say, does God exist? Because God is one of the key candidates, And so we're going to be looking at that question. Now, one of the ways we're going to do that, we're going to be using some reason, okay? A form of reason that's a bit like the way detectives reason. Because what we have in the world around us are a lot of clues. And those clues can be interpreted in different ways. And what we want to do is make the best sense we can of those clues and make an inference about what is most likely to be true about this prime reality.